Session this afternoon on regulatory compliance. I'll sort of be the moderator. I'm Bill Mosley. I'm a senior research administrator in sponsored programs. The session this afternoon is going to go over at a fairly high level the requirements for regulatory compliance when research involves human subjects, animal subjects, substances that might need biosafety controls, as well as export controls and conflict of interest and responsible conduct of research. So we've got folks joining us here who are experts in that from the Rick Rowe office, Research Integrity and Compliance Review Office, as well as the RCR office and Secure and Global Research. I'll let all of those folks introduce themselves as they start to present, but they're real quick. Claire Chance will be talking about human subjects research, Elaine Kim about animal subjects research, Christy Johnson about biosafety, Kim Cox York about responsible conduct of research, and Shannon Pipes about conflict of interest and export control and controlled unclassified information. Next one, please. Tricia. So regulatory compliance is going to come into play regardless of whether something is externally, internally, or not at all funded, but is still research and involves any of those areas that I just talked about that we'll have the experts joining us for later. There's lots of laws and regulations as well as sponsored terms and conditions that we have to comply with for sponsored projects. So I'll jump in after each of the experts for each of their committees talks about the work that they do and what's required and try to bring it back to in sponsored research, what do we need to do? So I think that's next slide. There's a few slides of some relevant terminology. We'll just go through those real quick. Research Integrity and Compliance Review Office and Secure and Global Research are basically where the folks that are going to talk today about their areas of oversight for research compliance are housed. So. And there's a picture of all of the research compliance committees that are actually housed on the RCRA website, and there's the link to it if you need to go back to it later. All right, I think we're off to Claire Chance to talk about research involving human subjects and what's required there from the Institutional Review Board.
Great, thanks, Bill. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Claire Chance, and as Bill mentioned, I'm an IRB coordinator here at CSU. The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and the mission that we have is really to review research that involves human participants, make sure that they're treated ethically, that research is done responsibly, participants are fully informed and consented, and that they're protected. We focus a lot on making sure that the risks and balances of research are appropriate. And once our review is concluded, then we'll provide like an actual approval letter for you that comes from the IRB saying that your project is IRB approved. And the IRB is made up of a committee of volunteers that has a diverse background and expertise that look at research from a number of different perspectives. Depending on what kind of research you're working on, you may submit research to us that gets reviewed by our biomedical research committee or our social behavioral and educational research committee. They're both two separate panels at CSU, but work under the same umbrella of the Institutional Review Board on campus. So the submission process and the process of getting everything reviewed is the same, no matter what kind of research you're doing. And once it's submitted to us, we'll go ahead and channel it to the correct panel for review. But those are the two different review boards that we have, biomedical research and social behavioral and educational research. All of our protocol submissions, processes, Determinations, correspondence, everything is handled through our protocol management system, which is called Quality Protocols. That's what Bill had mentioned there at the beginning as one of the terminology things. It's our, protocol module that houses basically everything that we do. So that's a good place to start if you want to get a feeling for what our application process looks like, and just kind of walk through the basics. Full protocols are reviewed there, but we also have other determinations that come out of that system. So if you aren't sure whether you're under the purview of the IRB, we also allow you to submit something called a not human subjects request. That way we can give you a determination officially from the IRB, just to let you know that. We also handle what's called a 118 determination, which is a preparatory to research memo. Sometimes you might need that at different stages in your proposal process, because a funder wants to make sure that you have some documentation. Those are handled in Quali as well. And then we also handle external reliances through the Quali system. And I'll talk about that here a little bit in a second. So that's all housed in Quali. If you are doing human subjects research, having an approval from the IRB is required before you start your research activity. This includes things like enrolling participants, putting your recruitment out there, starting any sort of research procedures, doing identifiable data analysis. Any of those things kind of fall in the realm. So you want to make sure that you get your project to the IRB before any of those things start in place. And that's totally disconnected from when your funding is secured. So we're really concerned about the timeline of when your research happens, not necessarily when your funding is completed. So really make sure you talk to us before your research gets going. When you are working on collaborative research that is or is not funded, but most often it will be based on this presentation, then there is an option for what's called a single IRB review. So instead of having collaborators at every institution get their own IRB review and approval from their respective institutions, you can have a single IRB review the overarching project that includes a number of different collaborators. It's an option for non-funded research, and it's required for some kinds of research. If you are working on a multi-site trial funded by NIH, for example, they'll require that there's a single IRB review, just like Tricia mentioned there in the chat. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you are working on federally funded research, that's an HHS, Health and Human Services Agency. They also require single IRB review for some funded studies that are doing the same thing. So that's something to keep in mind. You can go ahead and skip to the next one. But the important thing is what's actually under the purview of the IRB. We don't want you to have to go around and get a bunch of approvals where they aren't needed. So the first thing to check when you're working with human subjects in a research project is really to understand whether or not it's under the IRB purview. And for that to be the case, your activity needs to be defined as research, as listed here, and also as human subjects. If either one of those are not fulfilled, then you don't need IRB oversight or IRB approval. The definitions here are pulled straight out of the regs, that 45 CFR 46, which is the basic regulation set for our IRB review, called the common rule. You'll probably hear that. Defines research as a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. The sticking point here is often generalizable knowledge. People say, what does that mean? Most things that you're working on in an academic environment that are meant to be disseminated, shared, applied to a larger audience are generalizable outcomes. If you're working on something that's specific to just one institution or particular class, you're doing an assignment for a class, something like that, that don't have the ability to expand and generalize to other populations, that might not be generalizable. If you aren't sure, that's a great time to reach out to the IRB. And we do have an opportunity for you to submit, like I had said, a not human subjects determination form where we can help document that for you. The second definition that you need to fulfill to be under the IRB purview is a human subject. Human subject is a living individual about whom information or biospecimens are collected through intervention or interaction. And it also includes obtaining, using, studying, analyzing, or generating identifiable private information. This one can get really sticky. There's a lot of different words in here. But really, if you're interacting with a living person, asking them information about themselves, it's probably a human subject. You're checking those boxes. If you're working with getting or creating identifiable private data, it's probably a human subject. So those are the key definitions to start with at the very beginning of your application process to make sure that you need our oversight. You can go ahead and go to the next one. Once you determine that something is under IRB purview, it just kind of gets separated out into different levels of review. Exemptions, you might think of as kind of the baseline. It's minimal risk research that are specifically exempted from federal regulations. That needs to be determined by the IRB. It's not something that per institutional policy that we allow researchers to do on their own. So that still needs to be submitted to us. Expedited reviews are kind of the next level up. They're still minimal risk research, but they do have to fit into a certain list of criteria called the expedited review categories. It's not all encompassing. There are some things that just don't fall into there. But most minimal risk research that's not exempted qualifies for expedited review. Then kind of the highest level of review is a full board review. This goes to the entire IRB committee for review. It's generally higher risk, potentially harmful procedures, something that is clearly not exempted or expedite eligible, and generally greater than minimal risk. And those will be reviewed by the whole committee, but the overall process is similar and the approvals are similar. You can go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so yeah, at the proposal stage, you might be asked for an actual full protocol approval, especially if you're getting started with human subjects research right at the beginning. And in that case, you know, your formal approval letter will suffice for that. You might also be able to use what's called a 118 determination, which is a preparatory to research determination that comes from the IRB. For this, you would still submit something to us to let us know what your plans are, but let us know that they aren't fully developed yet. And we can give you a memo that tells your sponsor that we know it's coming, it's not ready to go, but that we have an acknowledgement back to them that IRB approval will be granted before research begins. Those are a couple options. And they will also ask you for your federal-wide assurance number. That's an assurance number that CSU has with the government, with HHS, that just says that we assure them that we are complying with this regulation set, so that we don't have to do a unique certification for each project, that they can rely specifically on that federal-wide assurance that CSU has for projects that fall under that overview. Is there anything you wanted to add here, Bill?
I'd just say that, you know, the slide's titled at proposal stage, but for the most part, we're allowed just-in-time proof of IRB approval. So we wouldn't, right before the award, we would have to document and provide a copy often of the IRB approval letter or the 118 memo if the research isn't going to happen for another year or something down the road and they've got preparatory work that has to be done. And that we would need the same sort of documentation from our subs if they're going to be doing the human subjects work and it's not going to fall under a single IRB. And the federal-wide assurance numbers on OSP's website under commonly requested information, and I think it's on the IRB's website as well. So.
I think we can move to the next one. Perfect. So yeah, I'll just jump in with a couple things here and then let Bill take it away. But yeah, anytime you have changes to an IRB approved protocol that changes anything substantially, including your research personnel, any documents that your participants will see, anything that impacts the risks or benefits of your research, or changes to procedures, anything like that, we'll want to see that at the IRB as an amendment and be able to get a new approval out to you, new approved documents that you can provide to the sponsor if needed to show updates.
I'll clarify that the first bullet point there about the institution and PI are responsible for notifying sponsors of a change in scope or IRB required modifications. So if a PI proposed a particular project and described it in their scope of work for that grant, at award stage, if they apply for the protocol with the IRB and the IRB says, no, you can't do that, and they negotiate, figure out what they can do. If that change to the IRB protocol means that the scope of work for the grant is changing, we would need prior approval for a change in scope. And the PI would be responsible for coordinating with us in OSP to go back to the sponsor to get that approval. That's what that one means, versus what Claire was talking about was changes as the research progresses to the what's being done with the human subjects. They would need to get approval from the IRB for changes to the protocol as well. So the two different kinds of changes we're talking about.
Yeah. Great, I think perfect.
Cool. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Now on to Elaine to talk about research with animal subjects.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Kim. I'm the Senior ICOOK Coordinator at CSU. I might talk a little bit fast because we don't have a lot of time, and also I did want to clarify a couple of things. So the RCRA website is still active, but technically the committees all don't have a RCRA director. We report to different people now, so technically you could say RCRA is doesn't really exist, but the committees, all of our work obviously still exists. So I just wanted to clarify that. We haven't gotten any updates on the website updates, but we are still, as we are able and as the staff have time to update, with policies and stuff like that. So I just wanted to clarify that because we used to report to one person, but now we report to different people. All right, let's go to the next slide, please, Tricia. So I try to take a big picture approach when it comes to where does this fit into the proposal to award stage timeline that Bill mentioned, trying to understand what the PI is going through and what to expect in terms of timeline. And so the information on the slides are kind of like the primer or, the basics of what the IACUC does. What do they look out for? They look for when live vertebrate animals are used for research or teaching at or by CSU people or at CSU facilities or at the behest of CSU, some people say, then the IACUC gets involved. And some of the research and teaching done with live vertebrate animals, depending on ownership and activities and the type of things happening, may require a full IACUC protocol, or we have developed a waiver system here that kind of mimics what Claire just went over with the human subjects. But basically, we don't expect you to know what is required. We expect you to ask us and to contact us. So that's one of the main things I wanted to point out here. It's that if you want to know what to expect when you submit a grant proposal to NIH, and that takes a certain amount of time, during that time period, if you want to get an idea of how long your protocol approval process is going to take, you reach out to our office. We have our contact information on our website, and you ask us, this is the work I think I'm going to do. This is the NIH grant that I think is going to get funded. what is going to happen. And then we walk you through it, and then we can help you get a protocol entered into the system, the KP system, as we call it on the IACUC side, for quality protocols. You see here a lot of acronyms and a lot of agency names. And the major ones here is that we have USDA animal welfare regulations. Those are the people that come to CSU unannounced at least once a year. And they do inspections of the facilities, look at the animals, and look at our documents. And so all of the information that we have, we provide to them, as we have to have this registration and undergo these things so that this work can happen at CSU. Also for NIH, they have an Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, and that is the office in NIH and the DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. It's like the animal side of the human subjects oversight. And so OLA, they don't come out to CSU, but they do have something called PHS policy, which is their regulation. And we have an assurance with them. So on the IRB side, Claire mentioned federal-wide assurance. And on the animal side, we have an OLA assurance, and that has an ID number. And that is something we have to have if you are going to get money, grant money from NIH, NSF, CDC, a bunch of different federal agencies, not all of them, but a good number of them. Both of our USDA and OLA ID numbers are on our homepage, as well as our ALAC accreditation number. That is something that's kind of tied to the OLA stuff. So there's lots of different types of animal work that happen at CSU, and that's kind of what is interesting about CSU. You not only have the vet school, you don't just have the infectious disease center, you also have wildlife conservation work, that's research and management. You also have teaching, you also have client-owned animals at the VTH, and then we also have now the new Spur building in Denver, Temple Grandin's equine centers in Denver and Fort Collins. We have some remote facilities for ag work. We've got a lot of stuff, and it's very broad in scope. And I see a question in the chat that says, how frequently does the animal welfare number change? The number doesn't change. It's for the animal welfare assurance with OLA, the date of approval changes because that document is only good for 3 to 5 years, and we have to resubmit for approval. So sometimes they ask for a date, and if they do, then it's probably for the OLA assurance or the ALAC accreditation. It's all on the website. Yeah, ours is 4 years right now, but OLA says that the OLA assurance can range in how long they approve it for, anywhere from up to 5 years. Yeah, okay, why don't we go to the next slide? So all of these things that go on, basically, there are a number of different safety nets in place, and IACUC is just one of them. And definitely in the realm of IACUC, even within that live vertebrate animal work, there are a number of other safety nets in place depending on the type of work. I say that because some people think that if the IACUC doesn't have purview, then no one's looking out for it, but that's not the case. I mentioned this specifically for Warner College work when wildlife are involved and if they're in the field. There's federal, state, and local permitting processes in place as well if they're going out into the field to do mark recapture. So there are a number of different things that happen, and IACUC is just one of them when it comes to the animal side of things, okay? So people often ask, how do I know what to do? And that's when we ask, you come talk to us, because similar to what Claire said, single IRB, you know, what is that compared to this other IRB stuff? Well, in the IACUC world, typically they do try to just have one IACUC approval because it depends on where the work's happening, who owns the animal, and who's getting the money. And so there are a number of different documents like the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU. Another MOU type is called IIA, which is the Interinstitutional Assurance or Agreement. And that one just says, who's the IACUC of record? We also at CSU have an IACUC waiver that documents the IACUC looked at the project information and confirmed a protocol is not needed because the work is not under IACUC purview. The reason this is in place is because some of the journals have asked for documentation to prove a review happened. And instead of just providing an email from the PI that says, I asked them, it doesn't fall under there, they wanted something else. And so we started doing this. And that has also then resulted in at the South Campus at VTH, there's a clinical review board that looks at client-owned animal consent forms. And also when it falls under an IACUC waiver for client-owned animals, they also look at the study information. And so we have this whole system in place on the IACUC side of things, and it depends on where the funding is coming from, what kind of funding, who's doing the work, where is it happening, and then if you want to add another complexity, it's the who's the prime and who's the sub. And then if some other situations I've seen is when there's a contract with the sub, right? The sub of a sub. And then if you want to add in federal flow through there, okay? The main point here is that that's complicated and it really depends on the project and the collaborators, and you need to call us. You need to call the IACUC office to talk about it, and so you know how long it's going to take, what to expect, and why these different purviews are happening, okay? I feel like it's too much to get into detail here, but I did want to encourage people as you're going through that proposal to award stage, to just keep in mind, how long is this going to take? If I have no clue, then I better reach out to someone to ask them, right? If you have an idea, but then something's changed, again, you can just reach out to us and then we can have a conversation. So let me just check the chat here. Trisha, why don't we go to the next slide? Yeah, so at the proposal stage, like I said, usually the IACUC approval is not needed. And I am talking about proposal like in when you're submitting a grant application. We do not, the IACUC does not expect, and usually the sponsor does not expect an IACUC approved protocol at that stage. That's kind of overkill. What we are familiar with and what NIH usually calls the just-in-time is that there's that sweet spot, right, where people say, I heard I'm going to get a good score. That is when people call us and say, what do I need to do? How much time is it going to take? I would suggest just a little bit, you know, if you've waited, what is it? If you submit a grant and then you want to say, let's just get these questions answered, you know, it just depends on the person, their style, but also depends on the type of work you're going to do. The more invasive, the more complex it's going to be, and the more collaborators or, you know, moving parts you're going to be involved with. We encourage you to just reach out and talk to us so that we are on the same page of what to expect. Still, yeah, only a few. I would agree very much with what Bill said. Only a few sponsors still want IACUC approval at grant proposal stage. That's very unusual now because they understand how much burden that puts on the PI. Let me just double check my notes here. And also, like I said before, depending on the work, an IIA might be appropriate. And who is the holder of the IIA? That's something for us to work out in our office. And if there are collaborators, we talk to their IACUC office or their funding office, their OSP. The other thing too is to think about some proposals have multiple studies and the IACUC work is only for one part. And so the protocol therefore only covers that part. It's only thinking about the facilities, who's doing it, how it relates to CSU, and what is our ethical oversight, what is our responsibility, and it's going to cover the relevant parts. If we don't have control over something, then that is not for us to say how they need to do it, okay? So let's just be clear on that part. Let's go to the congruency slide. So this one is talking about when you have PHS funds, and by PHS, I'm talking about NIH, CDC, the VA, NASA, NSF, and HHS, BARDA. So I mentioned a couple of agencies that are in different like departments because they have an MOU with OLA. And remember, OLA is an NIH, and they're the ones that have oversight over the live vertebrate animal work. So basically, they're saying you have this grant, and NIH says that's super cool. We're going to fund you, and then they submit the IACUC protocol at CSU because it's going to happen here. And then we say, okay, so we need the grant because we have to make sure that the two documents align, are congruent. Now, we're not going to say things like, you said you were going to inject this animal subcutaneously with a 17 gauge needle at 1 mil per, no, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is things that have been mentioned thus far. The scope of the work, the species being used, the overall objectives, very big picture things, right? And then if any of that changes, that is up to the PI to talk to the program officer about through the life of the grant. But then if they're making some significant changes, then they are obviously needing to update their protocol with the IACUC for sure. That has to happen. And just like Bill and Claire talked about on the IRB side of things, there are different, what's it called? Litmus tests for when does the sponsor need to be updated versus when the committee needs to be updated. So basically, if it's in the protocol and it changes, then an amendment needs to be submitted. And of course, as always, if you're not sure, you tell the PI to contact our office and we help them out. I would also say that there are other IACUCs that come into play and when an IIA is put into place, like National Park Service, NPS, Fish and Wildlife Service, we've got USGS, and we've also got the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, and Bureau of Land Management. Those are all federal agencies that have their own IACUCs and their own oversight processes. And depending on the work or the award, CSU IACUC could take their review. And so that's where the conversation is helpful to have our office with the PI and the collaborators, okay? The other group I wanted to mention locally at the state level is Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They also, for mammals and birds, have an IACUC. And CSU is lucky, I think, because we have local offices near us of all these different groups. And so if you have questions, you can reach out to them as well directly. And we know those colleagues as well. And then also their aquatics group doesn't technically have an IACUC. And so a lot of the work that happens with them, if CSU people are involved, our IACUC is the one of record there. And we go to their facilities to take a look at for inspections and stuff. The only thing I want to mention on amendments is like what Bill and Claire touched on before. Basically, what change needs to be reported to the sponsor is different than what the IACUC needs to know, because usually the IACUC needs to document and get those amendment changes into the protocol system more so than what a sponsor needs. And definitely, again, I don't expect you to know the difference, but I do expect you to know to contact us, to ask us, and to make sure we're on the same page, that you're following the rules or policies that are in place, okay? Let me see. I just wanted to check a couple of things that I'm seeing in the chat and on the slide here. The other thing I did want to touch on congruency, I just remembered after we moved on from there, was that congruency is done by the IACUC during protocol review, and that is an institutional responsibility, and that CSU has chosen to have the IACUC members handle this review to try to streamline the process. Other institutions have other groups in their institution take care of it, but that whenever federal flow through happens and it's under a PHS agency, so OLA is asking about some of this stuff, CSU says, okay, this is what we do. And then if someone else gets federal money, they say, yeah, and this is what we do. And if they're collaborating, we tell each other in the MOU or in the IIA, yeah, we're doing this for our work, and then you are doing that for your work. So it's transparent about what's going on and how the money is being used, essentially. I know I like really ran through a lot there. So of course, like I've been saying, just reach out to our office. If you go into the search engine for CSU, just look up IACook CSU, and you'll see our contact page, and you can just set up a time to talk with us. Bill, was there anything else that you wanted to add on?
I was just going to add that just like for IRB approval, often we'll have to have a just-in-time to show to the sponsor that the IACook approval is in place. And just like IRB, we in OSP need documentation, like the approval letter, before we can set up the 5.3 account for your PIs. So the timing, as Elaine was saying, of when you ask for approval is crucial, so that there's not a big delay in the ability to, once we get the award, to set up the 5.3 account and folks get going.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
It can be tricky. So reach out to Elaine and the folks on any of those committees if you have questions about how long is this going to take after proposal stage. They are good to help. So.
Actually, one last thing related to timeline that's there on our homepage for each committee is metrics of average turnaround time, so that can give a good, ballpark estimate. Thank you.
Yeah. Great, thanks so much. I know it is a lot for us to run through as we get to some other folks. So good to see you. And Christy, you're up, and I'll forward to your next slide. I apologize. I think my headset's hitting my roller ball and making the slides go crazy.
No worries. Hi, I'm Christine Johnson, and I'm the Senior IBC Coordinator for the Institutional Biosafety Committee, also known as the IBC. The IBC provides review and oversight for activities involving the use of biohazardous materials at CSU. So what biohazardous materials fall under IBC purview, and what are the policies and regulations that apply here? Our IBC reviews recombinant or synthetic nucleic acid molecules as outlined in the NIH guidelines. They also review any infectious agents or biological toxins. This includes all human, animal, plant pathogens, regardless of the biosafety level. We also have select agents here at CSU. This is a subset of high consequence pathogens that are highly regulated by the Federal Select Agent Program and require specific registration and inspections of facilities on a routine basis. Our IBC also reviews any agents or experiments that may have dual use of concern potential, and this is done under the Institutional Review Entity, or IRE, and we also review all use of human samples. One thing to note that compliance with both the NIH guidelines and the USG institutional DIRC policies, these don't just apply to NIH or USG funded research, respectively. These regulations apply to all research conducted at or sponsored by CSU. So one thing that's a little different with the IBC is it makes no difference where the funding is coming from, or even if there's no funding at all. If you were working with these biohazards, all research must comply with the appropriate regulations. Next slide, please. Any investigator that is wanting to work with these biohazards must submit an approval request to the IBC. We have two forms for this, and they are both submitted through the IBC online database, which is completely different and separate from quality protocols. It is a homegrown database that's been in place for quite some time now. This may be changing sometime over the next few years, but for the time being, we are kind of separate in our online database. The two forms are the Agent Approval Request Form, or the ARF, and this is required for each infectious agent. So this would include bacteria, viruses, prions, fungi, basically any living biological agent. And the ARF only gives the PI permission to possess the agent. If they plan to actually work with the agent, they need to submit a project approval request form, or a PARF. And this, the PARF is required to conduct the work. And this explains the work being done and the safety practices that are in place. As the safety aspect of it obviously is what the IBC is concerned about. The PARF must be in place before starting any work with the biohazardous materials. And it should be noted that some PIs, not all PIs are required to submit ARPs. An example of would be if they are only working with human samples, they would only need a PARF in that case. Also, both forms can be submitted concurrently and reviewed at the same time. For OSP purposes, when you guys are checking for IBC approval, you're going to want to ask for the approved PARF number and the relevant PARF information. You guys don't need to worry about the ARFs. I just put this information in here so that you're aware of it. And also because some PIs will say, well, I have an approved ARF for this virus. And then you would have to say, well, that's great, but where's your PARF number? So just because they have an ARF, this says that they can have the agent. That doesn't mean that they have approval to do the work. So it's really the PARF where the project information is and the approval that you guys need to look for. Next slide, please. All right, so once an ARF or PARF is submitted, our office determines the level of review and routes it appropriately with higher risk agents or projects requiring a more stringent review. For most projects that are eligible for designated review, these are reviewed on a weekly basis. For projects requiring full IBC review, these are done monthly. And all projects involving recombinant synthetic nucleic acids, select agents, or may have DIRC potential, these all have to go to full committee. So the PIs should plan accordingly for this. If a project also requires IRE review, the PI will be notified and asked for additional information. And the IRE review is done concurrently with full IBC review. So we really try to coordinate everything to make sure that it goes through as quickly and as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. Similar to the other committees, a few things to keep in mind at the proposal stage. It doesn't happen as often with the IBC, but some agencies do ask for proof of IBC approval. They want to make sure that we have the facilities in place for, especially if they're working with high containment agents. The granting agency wants to make sure that the PI has access to the appropriate facilities. One agency that comes to mind is Office of Naval Research. They always ask for the IBC approval.
Oh, Christy, that's a really good point. Oh, sorry. Sorry, because that's the DoD, you guys. The DoD and the VA do their own review regardless. They don't accept our IACUC. They have their own process, and for IBC and IACUC, more and more of the researchers are doing work with them, and so that is a very lengthy process. And Christy and I, some of our PIs overlap, and I just wanted to encourage you all to, if you reach out to one of us, you basically get a package deal. So thanks, Christy.
Of course. A double jeopardy sort of thing, right? We have to provide our protocol to their offices for review, and sometimes
yes,
No, you need to change it. So
Exactly. And so we give them our stuff and then they ask for more. And so it just depends on the project. I'm so sorry, Christy.
No, not at all. That's it. Yeah, DoD is another one that we have had. Yeah, they, particularly with some select agent work, they have come back and said, actually, you need to do it this way. So, yeah, so some of those do require IBC approval ahead of time. Some agencies will ask for, and this is actually a new one to me, some agencies will ask for the CSU select agent registration number. And for sub-awards that involve DIRC agents, this is like a very important and a very kind of nuanced one that needs to be, an eye needs to be kept on this. If it's sub-award and it involves a DIRC agent, CSU needs to make sure that the subrecipient has the appropriate DIRC policies in place. And I do believe that there are some questions on, and I don't know all the form names, but I know that I've worked with Chris Miller on this to get the correct information, the correct questions for that. Sure, I can explain just a little bit about DIRC. I didn't know how much time I would have. So DIRC is dual use research of concern. And there are a list of 15 agents that fall under the policy and a subset of 7 specific experiments, which mostly have to do with making pathogens more pathogenic or reducing our abilities to fight pathogens, like removing antibiotic resistance, or making prophylactics non feasible. So it basically has to do with making pathogens more pathogenic and controlling the information that allows that to happen. So a lot of DIRC, it's a lot of biosecurity and a lot of controlling information, and a lot of that happens further down the line of the research process, and such if somebody is doing research that falls under DIRC purview, they'll likely have to have their manuscript go through review before it's released. So Bill, is there anything else? I mean, I could give like a whole hour on DIRC, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, we still have 2 other
That's good. I just
presenters
wanted
to
to
get
quick
to.
overview.
Yeah,
So
I know. So
and about 10 minutes. So yep.
and then yeah, so the changes, there's not really a whole much more I need to add here. It's very similar to the other compliance committees. Just contact us. You need to get approval from the IBC before changing your R for PARF. And it includes everything, from changing the scope of the project, to changing the personnel and everything in between. Just contact us, and yeah, if there are ever any questions, we're here to help. Bill, was there anything else on IBC?
I think we're good. On to
All right, thanks.
Kim for RCR.
Yeah, thanks. I think I can tick through mine pretty quickly. My name's Kim Cox York. I am the Responsible Conduct of Research Coordinator and the Research Integrity Officer here at CSU. And the important thing to know about RCR is that it doesn't follow kind of these same regulation type things as IRB, IBC, IACUC. But we do have requirements, and they aren't, we have our own requirements that may or may not fall in line with what your requirements are. Ours will be over and above. So if you're on a training grant or you have students on training grants, they will be from NSF, NIH, or USDA NIFA. They're required to take some form of RCR. And for our purposes, we've sort of just leveled that out across graduate students and postdocs who receive funding from any of those agencies. to make it both rigorous to our standards, as well as to kind of standardize it, so we're not sort of keeping track of 50 million different types of training. The tenets are here. I won't go through them. I will say they were just updated on the 17th of this month, and I think thankfully to include also safety and diversity, and a lot around data, data security, data management, and open data. So these have been updated slightly just this month, but this is kind of what we go through in RCR. And you can take me to the next slide. These are our training requirements. So again, I said NSF, NIH, and USDA NIFA. So these are the only ones that require it. These are the only ones that we track. That said, everyone, all of your trainees and yourselves should be taking RCR training. And we have both face-to-face options and online. We moved our online training to the city platform, so that should be more cohesive with the IRB training. We're trying to get IACUC, IBC, and other trainings in this same place so that they can be, you can find them in one place and they're transferable. It may take some time, but RCR is there now. Whether you're required to take it or not, I encourage you and your trainees to take it. I'll get to that question in just a second. So with what our requirements are here, so for NIH and NSF, undergraduate students and USDA NIFA, undergrads only have to take online RCR training. Graduate students and postdocs have to take both an online and an approved face-to-face course. So on our website, there's a list of approved courses, and approval means that they kind of hit the majority of those tenets of RCR, and that it's a face-to-face course. So that's the requirement. That we did do some online when we had to go that way for the pandemic, but really the key is to be in conversation and in discussion about these topics. So that's why the face-to-face requirement. Similarly, USDA NIFA, their requirements are a little bit more recent, and they include online training for research assistant or associates, as well as faculty. So, and that kind of slips under the radar for a lot of faculty in particular. So keep that in mind if you have that. And then again, for grad students and postdocs under USDA NIFA, they have to have both. Agency asks you, yes. So good question, Tricia. Yes. So we don't have regular reporting with regard to RCR. But we do have to keep track of it, because if they come back and ask us, or if there's a finding of research misconduct, then we're under scrutiny for what types of training we're providing. So we do keep that up, and we track it every year. But that's kind of the reporting connection. Thanks for that clarification. And I'll just say this, right? I've already said it once, but I'll just reiterate that training is necessary regardless of what your funding is, and there are things that you may not think about. We're kind of putting together this graphic here to sort of give you an idea of all the things that sort of lead to things like research misconduct, and they can be quite nebulous and some seemingly disassociated, but can build up to lead into these real issues with misconduct. So we want to be sure that we're doing good work, rigorous research, mentoring appropriately, managing our data, all of these things that encompass RCR. So it's not a federal mandate, it's just sort of how we do our work. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. If you have any questions about research integrity or research misconduct, please get in touch with me. And most of the stuff should be on our website. Again, as I think Elaine said, there have been some changes, but we're doing our best to keep things up to date. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Hey, Shannon.
Hi.
You're going to talk fast for 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Go.
I will quickly go through conflict of interest, and then Rich will quickly go through export controls. So I'm Shannon Pipes. I am the Director of Secure and Global Research, as well as the Conflict of Interest, Export Control, and Facility Security Officer at CSU. So just FYI, the COI module and information still lives on Rick Rowe's website, but COI is managed through SGR, and hopefully we will get our website up to date quickly. So my first slide is what is a conflict of interest? So A conflict of interest occurs when a party has competing interests or loyalties because of their duties to more than one person or organization. This happens a lot at CSU due to the nature of faculty members developing technology and then either selling that technology and taking a role in an outside company or creating a startup. We also have some nepotism. We have a number of people who have labs that employ their spouse or a family member. And then we have conflicts of commitment. So faculty members that are providing consulting to businesses outside of CSU. So that's kind of what a conflict of interest is. So next slide, please. So financial conflicts of interest, the feds are really concerned about financial conflicts of interest in research. So when an investigator has a significant financial interest, which they consider $5,000 or more, that may compromise or have the appearance of compromising professional judgment in the design, conduct, or reporting of research. So another example of this would be if a PI has published a textbook, they're receiving royalties from their textbook, from the sale of their textbook, and then they're requiring all the students in their class to buy the textbook as reading for the class. So that would be one example. Another example is having a federal grant and subawarding to a company they have an interest in or to a startup that they're the founder in. So that's one of the things that the federal agencies are really concerned with. Next slide, please. So disclosures required for significant financial interest, like I mentioned, that is $5,000 aggregate annual income or equity related to the investigator's responsibilities. So that can be salary, consulting fees, honoraria, paid authorship, equity interest, income related to intellectual property, and any reimbursed or sponsored travel paid on behalf of and not reimbursed to the investigator. So disclosures apply to all individuals responsible for the design, conduct, and reporting of the research, and they may be required at time of submission for funding, and then proof of FCOI training may be required by some agencies. Next slide, please. So potential FCOI exists when investigators' significant financial interests could directly and significantly affect design, conduct, and reporting. So a lot of several federal and non-federal agencies use the PHS FCOI regulations. You can find a list of current agencies requiring adherence to the PHS FCOI regulations on RCRO's website. And for CSU specifically, our COI disclosure technology is Koali. We pull in all PHS grants into someone's COI disclosure, so they have to specifically answer whether or not there could be a conflict with a PHS grant. I'm hoping to pull in most grants just because we're missing some of those, but that's where we currently are right now. Next slide, please. So sponsor programs consideration. I don't know if Bill wants to talk about this, but I'm happy to talk about it. It's every 12 months. CSU has a rolling disclosure, and what that means is it is every 12 months unless you incur another COI or a COC. So if you have you have a PI that's created a startup, you have somebody who's taken an interest in a company and has an employee role or is consulting for that company. If it's happened in between the last disclosure and the next 12 months, they need to be disclosing that. So unit review for other support and sponsored required documents. Federal sponsors are increasingly concerned about investigators reporting potential conflicts. Next slide, please. Bill, did you want me to go through this or you want to?
I wasn't sure what you meant by the KRPD standard questionnaire. I think that may have been just a artifact from an old slide. I'm not sure.
Sure. So in Koali, there's a standard questionnaire regarding well, I don't know about sponsored programs, what their questionnaire looks like, but in our just COI disclosure, we have a question regarding whether or not there's any sort of international collaboration. I don't know about what that looks like, Bill, for your.
I think this screenshot is from the KRPD questionnaire section. There's a question that triggers a notification to STR that there may be export control involved, is what the purpose of that question is. But
Yep. Okay, so now it's Rich's turn.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rich Wright, and I'm the Export Control Analyst and Assistant Facility Security Officer. I work for Shannon in the Department of Security and Global Research. I will not take up too much of your time because there's a lot of questions surrounding CUI. But basically, CUI is a federal classification for any documentation, any data that requires safeguarding. This is going to be data that's going to be accessed from a non-federal or non-protected system. A good example would be one of the databases Shannon and I use to manage security clearances at CSU is CUI. So when we are accessing this information, there's a set of rules we're required to follow in order to protect that. And then these CUI requirements can be put into a contract. We hope they're put into contracts, but they can be very hard to determine at times. Next slide, please. Export controls really just cover anything that's leaving CSU. And in our case, even if it's going to a territory, if you're sending to Guam or if you are sending to the Virgin Islands, a lot of times folks will remind us that they are a U.S. territory, but we still need to verify the end recipient. This can be a consternation for some folks who want to remind me that Guam is one of us, but if you're mailing to Guam, we still want to verify the address, especially if it's going to a military address, because that can be harder to track. Export controls do follow under three primary departments. Department of Commerce follows export administration regulations. Those are the easiest of the three to work with. Many times, Department of Commerce exports do not require a license. It'll be dependent upon the country that we're sending it to and what we're actually sending. For EAR regulations, there's a matrix that we use where we bring in the country, we bring in the type of technology, we bring in the type of institution, and then Shannon and I can determine whether or not a license is necessary for that export. ITAR considerations are very different. ITAR does involve the Department of State, and IPAR is almost always exclusively dual-use technologies. Dual-use technology is something that was developed for one purpose, but can be easily modified by folks who are in the know to follow a different set of protocols. A really good example would be a drone that I've created with Bill that can hold a camera, and then Shannon turns around and uses that same drone and it can carry a gun. Even though, pardon me, we had originally designed it for one purpose, if it's a multi-purpose, then the Department of State can get involved. The Department of Treasury works with OFAC considerations. That is why we're not able to send money directly to an institution in Iran for one of their students that might be studying with us. The Department of Treasury will limit which countries that we can, as an entity in CSU, send abroad. Honestly, that isn't something that we come into contact with a ton in our office. And the majority of our exports do follow under the EAR, the Department of Commerce classification. Next slide, please. So this is what folks are going to see when they are doing the KR standard questionnaire. As you'll guess, every professor only works in fundamental research because none of them want to deal with the impacts when you're not dealing with fundamental research. As much as we love our PIs, we can't just take that for granted all the time. And so, as you know, a fundamental research exclusion will kind of bypass basically all of the other restrictions that I just talked about by the Department of State or the Department of Commerce. A very good example of that would be if I am publishing my coursework for my Engineering 101 class on the web, and I have international students or I have other folks that are accessing that, and folks in that field can more or less agree that the information in there is common knowledge for, say, a physicist or an electrical engineer or whatever the department we're working in, then the fundamental research exclusion kicks in. The biggest key to fundamental research, however, would be if the sponsor has any restrictions on publications, even if that's down the road. They may say you can't publish for 6 months or you can't publish until we have had a chance to look at it. Then the fundamental research exclusion likely will not apply. This is confusing, and I know we have a limited amount of time, so what I would say after that, Shannon and I are available for any questions, and the best thing to do when you have a question about an export is to reach out to one of the two of us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Apologies, it was a lot of stuff in an hour. I think the important takeaway is that we have all of these experts in these different areas. So if you have a question, go to their website, reach out and contact them. This recording is going to be made available after. Actually, all of the recorded sessions will be made available after. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to all of our presenters for joining us. We really appreciate it. Any final word, Bill?
Nope.
Okay,
Reach out
great.
if you have questions.